Hi, my name is Emma Hart, and this is an overview of the leadership interview I conducted with Cynthia Nickerson. She is the CFO at Remedy Television, which is a production company in Tampa. Her husband is actually the CEO. They're both owners, and the her husband built the company from scratch. So I chose to interview her because she's in my field. I'm finance major currently. I'm looking at accounting as well, but she went to school for accounting, actually started out working at a corporate accounting firm, which I thought was I wanted to hear how that like transition was for her. I just feel like she checked a lot of boxes for like things I'm curious about. And on top of that, because her husband founded the company, obviously she loves her husband. I like because it's such a like almost like passion project, like they're not just in it for the money. I thought that um, she would just be a very good person to interview. So my impression of her before the interview or during the interview, um, she was very open. She was very personable. One thing I really appreciated, every time she would make a claim about her leadership style, she would back it up with an example. So she was communicating with me on my level. She wasn't just making claims, she would then give me solid examples so that I fully understood her, which I really appreciated. She was very open, she was very warm. I didn't even feel like it was an interview. It kind of felt like a conversation because she's just so easy to talk to. Um, some key leadership characteristics we discussed. We discussed how she adapted her leadership style from the corporate world to the creative world. She said that in the corporate world, people, were very direct versus in the creative world, she had to adapt and be a little more soft, a little more small talk, etc., which I thought was very interesting. And everything she said in that aspect lined up very well with the path goal theory. She adapted to each follower, the LMX theory, um, on top of from group to group having to adapt, she said that each individual person, she views them as a whole person. She knows everybody's financial issues, medical issues, except family issues, all of that. So she views each of her followers as a full person, cares for them as a full person. She knows, she said different people have different motivators, have different communication styles, so you can't lead anyone exactly the same. She even said that leading a group, it's a psychological exercise to lead a group of people, as in you kind of have to flip flop from being direct to this person's motivated by money, this person's motivated by credit, and things like that. Um, I then asked her, do you think you just have these traits that make you a leader? Were you always a leader? Um, do you think you learned to be a leader? And she said that from a young age, she did always have this like assertiveness to her. So she did have that trait of just being very assertive and taking ownership of every situation she's in. But she said she doesn't think that is the only way to be a leader, that you can learn to do this. She said being a leader is all about ownership and trust, taking ownership of the situation and making those around you believe that you care about them and trust you. Um, so while her experience did kind of fall into the trait theory, her response, she says that like you can learn skills to be a leader, um, and that she herself has had to learn from different group, how to lead differently. She even said that at first, being very assertive and taking ownership of every situation, she would people in her group projects or whatever she was in would see that she was just taking the project over and let her do all the work, and then she'd end up overwhelmed. So she said she did have to specifically learn to delegate. She did have to specifically learn to soften her communication styles for different people, things like that. So yes, there are certain traits that she had, but she had to adapt to become a better leader. Um, I asked her about some of the bad and good leaders she's had, and she said the good leaders she's had motivate with positivity, and they wouldn't ask you to do anything they wouldn't do themselves, things like that. A bad leader she had, she said in the corporate world there was one leader she had that was very, very, very political. The culture was very political. Everyone was just looking out for themselves, and she said that she learned from that, and in her company, her and her husband, when they hire a person, they tell them right up front, we do not tolerate politics. We do not tolerate trying to manipulate and climb up in the ranks. We do not tolerate things like that. Um, and I asked her a little bit more about this. I said, have you like what situations have you been in where you've had to deal with this? And she said, um, when resolving this kind of political tension almost. She said instead of just firing them basically the way they handle it is they sit the person down and they say, hey, what's going on? She said open communication is very important to how she leads. They just sit them down, talk to them, give them the chance to fix themselves, which I think, again, goes into looking at the person as a whole, because maybe they came from a corporate situation and they're not used to this open, trusting culture. So they give the person the chance to adapt. She said many have, but if they continue to kind of treat others the way they are, you have to do what's best for the majority and cut it out. Speaking of what's best for the majority, I asked her what is the biggest challenge you've had to face as a leader, and she said during the Great Recession, her and her husband, they saw the hardships coming, projects were plummeting, they had no projects open at one point where they were just biding out time, hoping that the economy picked back up. But because obviously in a recession, I feel like entertainment people stop spending in that area, stop investing in that area. So they took a hard hit. But she said when they realized the recession was coming, they had two options. They could either take the reserves that they have from the company and make the company last as long as possible and hope they ride out the storm and keep everybody's jobs, or they can take the reserves and take the profit and run with it. And this was part of the reason I chose her as an interview subject. But she said her and her husband were just so passionate about the company, they would rather invest in themselves than take the profit and run. So they looked at the group, kept as many people on working as possible. The people they did lay off, they gave them severance, which at the time I guess was not common. A lot of bigger companies were just laying people off with no severance. So that goes back to that like trusting and looking at the person as a whole. They're not just an employee, giving them that severance. They also kept on as many people as possible, and basically this is the biggest like most telling part of the scenario to me, but her and her husband didn't take a salary until the company was back on their feet. And again, I think this goes directly into authentic leadership. They truly care about their employees and truly care about their company so much, and that builds so much trust that, I mean, who wouldn't want to work at a company like that? So once they got back on their feet and they had their salaries back, they hired back as many employees as possible, and obviously they were happy to come back because that's such an amazing culture to be a part of. And I just think this was an excellent example that she gave about being authentic, being open, and just taking care of making your employees feel as safe as possible. She said culture is a very big deal to her and her husband, which obviously I see in all these stories she's telling me. And my perception of her might be one of the best leaders I've ever experienced. She's just so caring of everyone around her, and like I truly believe she cares about every single employee, and they all trust her, and there's just this like bond in their company, from what she's told me, that's so strong. And I think that's why they were able to ride out the Great Recession the way they were, because they all had each other's backs. And I mean, having her husband be her partner, I think again goes into like their company is about more than just like a professional company. It goes deeper than that. Like her and her husband are obviously partners in life and also in their careers. And I just think she really plays into like we talk about humility being the most important trait of a leader, and I think she is the prime example of this. So overall, key statements that aided in my understanding, just everything she said about, you know, adapting from person to person, look at the employee as a whole person and not just as someone that's working for you. Culture is so important, like safety is so important. Just things like this really help me understand the kind of leader she is. Thank you so much. And yeah, I really enjoyed this assignment.